There are two things I seem to be fairly good at. Going to the gym regularly, though you would never tell it by looking at me, and clearing out my books quarterly. I've got a box that I utilize as my receptacle for books that I have read and probably will never read again, or have read and cannot pass on to anyone because I don't know who that would resonate with. And then I get rid of them. Because it is December 5th to be exact, as I am filming this, I am getting ready to do my quarterly purge or unhaul. So in today's video, what I'm going to do is walk you through the titles that are no longer going to be on my shelves. I mean, not that they were on my shelf after I finished reading them, because that's what the box is for. Oi. But yes, welcome. My name is Nick. This is Dr. Cranky Pants Reads. And today we are evicting some books out of my home. So when I was getting ready for this video, one of the things that I realized is, yes, my box was very full, and I didn't account for the fact that part of the reason why it was so full was because I was also clearing out like workbooks. So books in my office that I use for work in various capacities, because I don't want to be that professor who either one dies and then leaves all of their books for everyone to like sort through and figure out, like that's no fun, or just leaves their old books in the hallway and figures someone will pick them up. We're not about that life. That is not what we're about. So I recently went through my collection of books at work and culled and realized that a good majority of the books in the box were from work. So it's going to be some riveting content with a slightly smaller number of books, but that's okay. I'm going to go through the books and talk a little bit about why they're no longer going to live with me, why we're breaking up. It's going to be sad, but someone's got to do it. So let's get started, shall we? First up is a book I actually really liked. This is The Stranger's Child by Hollinghurst. You may remember me reading his book, A Line of Beauty, also in this unhaul. And I really did enjoy this book. I read this during my trip to Europe this summer and finished it in Berlin, but I didn't finish this copy. I bought this copy maybe a year ago and didn't make the connection when I was in London and found it at a used bookstore and bought that copy and then proceeded to read it while I was over there. And it was a book that I really, really enjoyed. It's this really fascinating look at how we remember or misremember those people that we love and how legacy shifts and changes over time. It's actually one of my favorite books that I've read in 2024, which I'll have a short coming out about that later. So if you're interested, keep on the lookout for that book. But The Stranger's Child was a delight. Truly one of my favorite books of the year. But remember, I love a book with scope. And so that whole temporal changing over time with Cecil and his poetry just was my jam. However, as much as I enjoyed it, I don't think I'm going to read this again. I really enjoyed my time in this book, but I don't see it being something that I'm going to come back to over and over again. So away it goes. Someone else will love to find this at the used bookstore because Hollinghurst is great and sometimes hard to find in a used bookstore. Since we're on a Hollinghurst kind of jive, let's talk about The Line of Beauty. The Line of Beauty is a book you've seen me wrestle with on this channel, and I don't know that I ever actually talked about it. This is a book about class. This is a book about sexuality. This is a book about Britain as they're in the grips of Thatcherism. And it's told from the perspective of this character named Nick Guest, who is just graduating and is moving into his doctorate, living with his friend's family, who happen to be very upper class, very posh. And his entree into that world is fascinating, because he is trying to figure out what it means to move above the class you were born into and move into those larger circles when you yourself don't have the resources that your peers might if you were in that social circle. And then he is also gay and trying to figure out what that means in terms of partnership and just what he wants from life. And because it's the early 80s, there is the oncoming specter of HIV/AIDS in this novel, which makes it a little hard to read at times because of the kind of claustrophobia that queer communities must have been experiencing at that time becomes very apparent in this book. I ended up really enjoying the book. I think I made a comment in a video where I was like, Nick, I don't care if he lives or dies. Like the last quarter of the book, he kind of redeems himself. Hollinghurst pulls all the threads together, and it was an enjoyable read. Would I enjoy reading it again? No. But I'm glad to have read it, and I'm glad to be passing it on to someone else. Again, Hollinghurst is sometimes hard to find in a used bookstore, so I'm hoping that someone will find it and enjoy it. This is Micah Nemer-Evers' These Violent Delights. I got this for my birthday and really enjoyed the dark academia vibe of this book. It takes place in 1970s Pittsburgh and follows two students, Paul and Julian, who fall into this really interesting codependent relationship that is disturbing, to say the least. I mean, the book starts with a kidnapping, if that gives you any indication of what kind of book this is. It's very dark academia. It's very in the line of The Secret History. I also really enjoyed this book. There was something about this book that propelled me through it, and it was one of my favorite reads of 2024. So a more detailed explanation of this one is forthcoming. But if you like dark academia, These Violent Delights was entertaining. This one gave me some shelf doubt. I have a video coming out on that too, a little short. But I bought this when I was in Europe. I was really excited to read it. I heard about it on Book Riot, I believe. And it's supposed to be this tension-filled novel of three friends and who's going to end up with who. The book takes place in Stockholm. I love Stockholm, so I really loved revisiting that city through this book, but never quite bought into the relationship between the three characters, and the role of money in the book just felt a bit more didactic than I would have liked to. So, the trio, 3 stars. Did I love it? Did I hate it? I don't know yet. So away that one goes. Happy to have read it, glad that I found it, but passing it along. This Other Eden was another book that I read this summer while I was in Europe, and I really enjoyed the premise of this book, as disturbing as it was. It's about a family. I believe the father was formerly enslaved, and then he and his wife live on this island, and the island is then deemed as something that is desirable by the mainland white community, and you can imagine what happens next. Beautifully written, gorgeous book. Am I going to read it again? No. And I loaned it out to someone to read, and they returned it. So I think it's going to, I don't think it is going to the used bookstore. And then, Colleen Hoover. Can someone explain Colleen Hoover to me? I could not finish. I couldn't get past, I think, page 25 of this book before I was like, nope, this is not for me. Despite what my undergrads say, this is not for me. This is not for me. So, Colleen Hoover, Verity, going back to the used bookstore. Let's talk some informational texts. I talked about this in my November wrap-up or October wrap-up. I talked about this somewhere. This is The Teacher Wars, Dana Goldstein. She's writing about the ways in which the teaching profession came to be in terms of the mission-driven kind of thing that it is, like, oh, teaching's a calling, which, it drives me crazy. And the relationship between teaching and unions and where we are now, or at least 10 years ago. This book is about 10 years old. I've moved this book about 4 times. I've read it twice, once when it first came out and once last month. I don't think I can get anything else from it in terms of, I took much better notes this time. And so I'm feeling good letting it go. Someone else can learn about that history, and I hope that they enjoy it. Cal Newport, Slow Productivity. This was in my first monthly wrap-up, and my feelings haven't changed. It still feels like I don't know what's actionable from it. It's a very philosophical book, and I don't necessarily want philosophy at this point in time. I want things that I can apply the next day. So away it's gotta go. Away it's gotta go. Someone will really enjoy it, I think. Someone who has more capacity for that than I do right now. The other thing that I did was I did a quick sweep of my middle grades novels for teaching. I teach children's literature in the summer in particular. And so I like to, every couple of years, switch out the books that have been on my reading list for a very long time. We also do historical fiction units in my reading class right now. And so I've got one of those that I'm going to pass on to the used bookstore because the other copies are being used by students at this point in time. So let's start with A Place to Hang the Moon, Kate Albus. Super enjoyable book. Kate Albus is a delightful middle grades author. This is a book about World War II. A trio of orphans leave London during the bombing of London and move into the country with hopes of finding a new guardian because their grandmother, who was their guardian after their parents died, has also died. And part of what they're trying to do is find someone who will adopt all 3 of them. It feels a little bit like Series of Unfortunate Events if Series of Unfortunate Events was less snarky, less sarcastic, and set during World War II. That's A Place to Hang the Moon. It was delightful, and to go with kind of a holiday theme, a really touching Christmas scene. Just delightful. Delightful. But I'm probably not going to read it again. And if I do, I will borrow it from the library. Another book that I was thinking of using in class, this was for a study abroad to London, was Splendors and Glooms by Laura Amy Schlitz. I talked a little bit about this in a short during October. It is this Victorian England story of 2 orphans who are working with a puppet master who's cursed. And this curse just explodes when a young rich girl whose birthday party the puppet master is performing at disappears, and the adventure that happens with that. I really like this book a lot. However, I don't think it's the right book for that class. I've found other books that I think are better fits. And so Splendors and Glooms, you gotta go. You gotta go. This is There Once Was. This was just one that I wanted to read. It had a lot of buzz around it. It's about a young girl who her mother has died, and she and her veterinarian father are trying to like figure out how to make that happen. And then he disappears. And it turns out he is a vet for mythical creatures, and there's this whole underworld that controls the mythical creatures because the mythical creatures create luck for certain people who have them. And I'm going to be real honest. This book, I finished it. I didn't quite know it tried to be a lot of things. Just as I try not to be an adult reader who reads a middle grades novel and goes, oh, well, it should have done this and it should have done this and it should have done this. Because the novel isn't written for me. Like, middle grades novels aren't structured for adult readers. And I try to keep that in the back of my head. But there was too much going on. I didn't know if this was a book about grief, or a book about the mythical creatures, or a book about the underworld of people who control the mythical creatures. And I didn't quite buy in to all of that in ways that I would buy into other books. Like, for instance, A Place to Hang the Moon is a very series of unfortunate events. And I totally bought into the fact that they go from this archetype of a family to this archetype of a family to this archetype of a family without questioning it, because Elbis knew what she was doing as an author, versus this one felt very scattershot, and I didn't quite know how all of it was coming together. And I'm not actually convinced that it did all come together. Did I enjoy parts of this book? Completely. Am I going to read it again? No. Is it going to make a reading list? Probably not. But I do think this was like Target's book of the year for middle grades last year, or something like that. But it was a thing. This is Becoming Muhammad Ali. This is James Patterson and Kwame Alexander. This is the biography of Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, and I am switching it out for another biography or another set of biographies in the coming semester. So this is, I think, 4 years old now. I like to keep updated as much as possible, and this one has been on the syllabus for a while. So that one's also heading out. The same thing with When Stars Are Scattered, which is this beautiful graphic novel that I've used before in class, and it's just time to swap it out. I think this is also 4 years old. So it's time for it to get retired. So those are all of my kind of general literature books. I also have, this was a really interesting read that some of you who are writers might be interested in. It's William Germano's On Revision. I read this book as part of my preparation to revise. One of the courses that I teach for our CPED program is their literature review course. And one of the tricks there is revision and teaching revision. So I was hoping that this book would be helpful. And it was, in some ways. It's a very philosophical approach on thinking about revision and how revision is essential to writing and how revision can look differently and how revision works to do particular things. But it's not a how-to. It's really more of a how to think about revision and then figure out what are the practices that kind of thinking about revision requires. Enjoyable book. Will I come back to this? I'll probably come back to parts. I'll probably come back to like a chapter or two that, I've made notes on, but I probably won't come back to the entire book. Again, because it's more philosophical, and for that purpose, for that particular class, I really needed more help thinking about how to make what he's talking about here in very philosophical terms, very concrete for folks who may not be feeling as confident with their writing as they could be. But enjoyable book. I really did enjoy this one. I just don't think I will come back to it as like a reference. So, and then the rest of them are just books from work, some of which I still need to remove the sticky tabs from. So that's my current book unhaul. The next time you'll see me, I will probably be in the parking lot talking about the minuscule amount of money I got for them and whether or not I actually was able to walk out with money or did I spend more money? This is going to be the question. That's going to be the question. So stay tuned and find out. Okay, box there. Let's talk through what... Gosh, this is precarious. Should have thought this through. Okay, so for my box, they gave me $26.72, which isn't bad. It was pretty full. I'm not unhappy. I did manage to get out with only one book purchase. I bought a brand new copy of the corrections. I've never read it and I've wanted to, and it was $2. So we're just gonna go with it. If I take it on a trip and leave it somewhere, I'm fine. That's great. Delightful. Someone else can enjoy it. I will get my $2 out of it. And then also bought a new book for a friend. That was also in clearance. So I only spent $4. I got rid of or released into the wild 38 books and only bought one for myself. That's a success, I think. It's really hard to talk with my Invisalign in. Ugh. So I think that's gonna be it for this video. Thanks for watching my first unhaul. Weird outro, but we're gonna roll with it. Next week, I will be talking through the 12 books I am looking forward to reading the most in my current TBR pile in 2025. So come see what titles I pick and when I'm going to read them and why next week. But as always, I appreciate you. I hope life is good, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Am I a vlogger now? Is that what I'm doing? Am I vlogging? Am I doing it right?